Trying to be something you're not is tricky business, and when you're trying to shake up a beloved billion-dollar holiday, it's even harder. Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, though, having a decent box office open, and admittedly odd aesthetic and premise, became an extraordinarily successful multimedia franchise for decades. Which leads to the question, what about this film, and the stop-motion medium as a whole, allows Burton's work to be so deeply imprinted in the imagination of children, despite the uncanny subject matter and potential to inspire the abject through usage of the corpse and other horrifying objects. The Nightmare Before Christmas weaves between the real and the imaginary. Jack Skellington has real emotions. He wants to be free. He wants to change. He is a real object that light can bounce off of and be captured as an index on the film. At the same time, it's imaginary. He is the ruler of a German expressionist hellscape domain, with dark swirls and curls, amidst monsters and bugs. His love interest is an amalgamation of corpse body parts, and his best friend is a ghost dog. It begs the question, can these imaginary objects have real emotions? Do they have a real sense of destiny? Can we as an audience relate to such monsters?
So, like Dr. Finkelstein, we'll dissect these components to show you the whole of the project we've created.
So, we're first going to open with a discussion of the uncanny that we briefly mentioned in class, that both the rotoscope creates weird movement because it's a deviation from reality, just a stop motion because it's real but also exaggerated. For example, if you look at the stilted walk of Sally, she tends to tilt. It feels wrong. You look at Jack, and he crawls like a spider. Again, horrifying. Freud explicitly discusses the movement of the automaton or the lifeless doll in his essays of the uncanny. Quote, Jensch has taken as a very good instance doubt whether an apparently animate being is really alive, or conversely, whether a lifeless object would not be, in fact, animate. And he refers this in connection to the impression made by waxwork figures, artificial dolls, and automatons. The existence of these objects are a breach. They're not supposed to move. Stop motion makes them move. This is a class of terrifying that leads us long known to something known to us, once very familiar. In the case of Nightmare Before Christmas, these are toys and holidays. These are the foundations of our youth, of our childhood, knocking on all of our doors on Halloween or opening your toys on Christmas. These are set moments in our lives that Nightmare has taken out of its comfort zone, out of our homes, where we shared these emotions and feelings, and given them life when they otherwise shouldn't be. Nightmare furthers its feelings of the uncanny by adding a level of horror to it, in that abjection is found, or something that is intimate to oneself that is at the same time purged, rejected, and disavowed. Rejected, ejected, exceeds our ability to process in language in symbolic terms. It is, in other words, an other that is horrifying. And we see that through the body horror of the characters. A corpse, something away from God and science, is reanimated in Nightmare through Sally. The skeleton king, something that should remain in the dirt, long and buried, crawls all over the screen with dark, sallow eyes, ready to inspire fear into the hearts of children and adults alike. It is terrifying. There are bugs and critters, things that crawl not only on our bodies, but should, theoretically, hurt our minds. And we see the division of boundaries, the erosion of boundaries where Jack enters the real world, where he gives children bugs and corpses. He violates their childhood by giving them something they have no knowledge of until now. Jack introduced them to death and horror. It should be terrifying. The notion of abjection breaching onto the boundaries of what we know is even furthered by the real world as represented in Nightmare, its differences in character and background, and Jack's world intruding on top of it, of which we'll discuss in a moment. But first, let's discuss the horror genre as a whole. As Noel Carroll writes, the audience should, in theory, respond to a mediator character respond in that protagonist's shuddering, nausea, shrinking paralysis to the monster. It is a mirroring effect that is the key feature of the horror genre, because it's not the case for every genre. The audience is supposed to repeat those elements. But we are attracted anyway because we want to see that protagonists breaching into the unknown. So in the discussions of the real, we're going to move to Bazin in the Ontology of the Image. As he states, photography ranks high in the order of surrealist creativity because it produces an image that is the reality of nature, a hallucination that is also a fact. So despite all these exaggerated imaginary visuals, there's a lot of the real, where the light can pick up and reflect back into the film. There's still a 3-point lighting system. It is a movable, just miniaturized camera, but these are real figurines. In that, stop motion becomes an index and it adds a layer of real weight to the characters, and that could be why, to an extent, we can empathize better with them and stop motion mediums generally. If we look at the rotoscope, it is the mimesis of movement, but not of the character themselves. We still know they're fake, despite the fact that they're moving. But Jack and his friends have some level of real to them. In fact, even the effects were still endeavored with the idea to make things real, whether that be real smoke or good Zero. With Zero the Ghost, despite the fact that he's a transparent image, it wasn't animated through pen and paper. It was used with the Pepper's Ghost effect, or the refraction of transparent glass, effectively making a mock-up of a second set just to keep Zero transparent. Burton really wanted to make things feel, to some level, real, and ground and anchor the film in that reality, no matter how imaginary it got and how scary it got.
So how was this reality created in stop motion? Well, first, there was heavy storyboarding. Stop motion, as noted by Max Sinrat in The Window and Wild Reading, takes a very long time. Nightmare took 3 years. Labor and material cost, alongside the medium's prohibitions on improvisation, means meticulous planning is imperative. 2. The backgrounds. All set need to be constructed where any figure was not more than 2 feet away from the figurine, else trapdoors were constructed were quite large to imbue the feeling of depth, shadow, and realness. This gives us a more comprehensive look of depth, using real staging and lighting that animation is not able to do. Realities were split into 3 worlds: Halloween, Christmas, and the real world. Halloween world is gothic, cross-hatching, and dreary, inspired by the pen and ink drawings of Edward Gorey, Ron Serlet, and Germanist expressionist movement. Specifically, expressionism focused on large shadows and the deadly gothic appeal. It also instantly brought us to the element supernatural and to a world that will move with us and somehow is alive. We think of Nosferatu with exaggerated geometric surroundings that allow us to enter the heightened and imagined world away from our own. The sets are never shown in bright lighting, and even in the daytime, there is a gloominess from the overcast weather. We feel the suppression of the environment. A subsection of a Halloween world is the boogeyman's lair, which is shown to be a underground and reclusive area, and is reminiscent of the Fleischer Studios' Minnie the Moocher in background setting. It's set up to have the boogeyman as a danger factor. The Christmas world is bright, reminiscent of other Christmas stop-motion films, with saturated hues and snows blanketing the surrounding environment. While it's obviously cold in weather, it feels warm. The set's background glows with red and mimics the red of the cheeks of the characters. In the home of the elves, we feel the warm lighting. We feel the peacefulness that the Halloween town can never achieve. In the real world, we have plain design, which is familiar to all of us. The cars, the skyscrapers, the buildings, and we are far detached from the fantastical element. All of the lighting is made with electricity or the overcast of the moon. The real world has a plain design. It's something we all know. Cars, skyscrapers, buildings, and we're far detached from the fantastical element that the other 2 worlds imbue.
An important note on character design would be, while making these physical objects, the animator took great lengths to be able to provide them with a full range of emotions. So Jack has not only a detachable head, but detachable heads that have alternating eye movements. So it's alternating mouth movements to match the syllable. If you look at the character of Sally, While her whole head isn't detachable like Jack is, her faceplate is able to move as well to, again, have a fuller range of emotions. And then when looking at, say, their eyes or their mouths, they are exaggerated. They are wide and sad, can furrow in, and can change. And this change in face differentiates it from the static skeleton, the static corpse. The stop motion movement and movement of the face gives them life. And in that life, they have emotion. Sally and Jack can be sad for their round eyes. Have that same sad quality of the sad dwarves in Snow White.
Then with the boogeyman, his character design is created in the Fleischer Studios manner. The baggy style of the boogeyman, being in a sack, is similar to the wardrobe of Cab Calloway's ghost, baggy trousers. The slickness of the boogeyman's movement is really similar to how Cab Calloway's ghost slides across the room while he spills out his jazz song. The slickness of movement is also slippery. That makes us feel the danger in his character, even though the bagginess is not particularly threatening. Continuing on with character design, Jack Skellington has a round skull with a detached jaw that is far removed from how human skulls actually look. This is important because if he did have the look of a human skull, it would make him look far more creepy, far more uncanny, and far more terrifying. And it would hurt our chances to empathize with him. Instead of having this detached skull, he has a smile that's always curled up, and it's always welcoming and inviting. His body is long and stretched, which does remind us of the expressionist movement. He can take his head off and he can pull it out. But even though we have those elements, he seems and feels harmless, like he couldn't actually hurt us. And I think it's because they add these elements that make him more fictional. He's not an actual skeleton. With Sally, we also have a framework of Frankenstein, and that for watchers and readers of the original Dr. Frankenstein, we feel that we have an emotional attachment to her because she's stitched together and created unknowingly.
Our scene for analysis, which blends in a lot of our topics from class, including synchrony of music to the visual, would be Jack's lament on Spiral Top. So, just as we discussed earlier, in theory, this song should be absolutely terrifying, right? So on the image perspective, you have an anthropomorphic skeleton that moves like a spider amidst a graveyard. And the lyrics are horrifying. I can't sing, but I have seen grown man give out a shriek with a wave of my hand and a well-placed moan. I have swept the very bravest off their feet. And if you look at Sally, the camera actually takes a canted angle as she walks to signify how she too is off kilter. Again, scary. And the expressionist background, as noted earlier, amplifies this. It is heavy shadows, heavy swirls. The world is enveloped in darkness. But that darkness that pervades the film up to this point, about the 20-minute mark, is broken by the moonlight. And as the moon shines, as light breaks the darkness of the space, Jack sings, "Yet year after year, it's the same routine, and I grow so weary of the sound of screams. And I, Jack the Pumpkin King, have grown so tired of the same old thing." Jack realizes that he is uncanny and a horrifying figure. The audience realizes he's a horrifying figure, and both realize that Jack is sick of it. As noted earlier, he's not just undead. His eyes tilt inward, and he frowns. While his body is hollow, his emotions do not ring that way. The moonlight hits him and hits the camera. Jack has real emotions, and stop motion makes these dreams real because he is real. And that is how audiences are enabled to have empathy, which is even furthered by Sally. On one hand, Sally too feels trapped. Her eyes, her face express that emotion. Her reality furthers that. At the same time, she is a form of identification with the audience. If we were to assume the mirroring argument, we identify with Sally. For Sally turns to Jack at the end of Jack's song and goes, "Jack, I know how you feel." Jack is real and imaginary, and he's caught between it. In the audience, we relate because we have those same struggles too, of our reality and our dreams and the dissolution of our childhoods. This is the game Tim Burton plays. That is how stop motion navigates that gap, and ultimately that is how the real wins out over the imaginary. Can monsters feel? Do they yearn? The answer is yes. They yearn and have pain just as we do. They are real just like us. And that is why Jack lives on in our imaginations. And because of the attachment that the audiences have with these toys, with these objects, they are again reminded of their childhood, which is why this film has lived on for so long, has done so financially well with its memorabilia. On one hand, if you buy the action figure, the representation of Jack, you too get to share in that reality. Whether you pose Jack just like that, or even make your own films, you are invoking those same feelings because you can quite literally hold Jack. But it's not just limited to the figure. You have shirts, coolers, canvas art, cufflinks, stuffed animals, gallery showings, children's books, video game crossovers, their own video games, Disneyland appearances, Disneyland parades, the Botanical Garden Light Show, card games, and concerts. The list goes on and on and on. But the reason why it's so successful, and the reason why millennials may get a Jack Skellington tattoo, is because despite its uncanniness, they identify with the emotion. They identify with Jack's feeling of loss that is heightened through music, sound, and the visual. Jack, like all of us, yearn for more. Yearn whether it be return to the past, a change in one's present, and maybe a brighter tomorrow. And that is how Tim Burton is able to avoid the pitfalls of fear and allow for children to identify with Jack and Sally's pain.